Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, has issued a strong warning regarding what he describes as a growing concern for Africa's fuel markets. Speaking during a major downstream petroleum conference held in Abuja, Nigeria, Dangote raised alarm about the increasing influx of cheap Russian refined fuel products into African countries. According to his remarks, the trend could have serious implications for the continent's refining industry, which is still in its early stages of development.
Africa's wealthiest man, Aliko Dangote, is sounding the alarm, warning that cheap Russian oil is flooding the continent's markets and threatening its refining industry. Speaking at a conference in Abuja, Dangote said Africa is becoming a dumping ground for discounted, often substandard, and even toxic fuels. Many of the products, he says, wouldn't meet safety standards in Europe or North America.
Dangote, whose Dangote Refinery in Lagos is currently Africa's largest and one of the most sophisticated, highlighted that these imported Russian fuels are not only being sold at discounted rates, but may also be of questionable quality. He explained that many of these fuels, including diesel and gas oil, would not pass regulatory safety standards in Europe or North America, but are nonetheless being sold and consumed widely across Africa. The businessman attributed the situation to ongoing Western sanctions placed on Russia since the beginning of its conflict with Ukraine. As traditional markets in the West began closing their doors to Russian crude and refined products, Moscow has reportedly turned to alternative markets, including Africa. By offering these products at steep discounts, Russia is gaining new buyers and, in turn, reshaping the global fuel trade routes. Dangote expressed concern that the African market, due to relatively relaxed regulatory oversight in some regions, has become an easy dumping ground for these products. He pointed to the practice of using floating storage tanks off the coast of West Africa, particularly in areas like Lomé, Togo, where fuels are blended, stored, and redistributed into local markets. This method, he warned, opens the door to price distortions and quality concerns that could destabilize Africa's nascent refining efforts. He urged African governments to consider taking protective steps, such as implementing tariffs on fuel imports, setting strict emissions and quality standards, and encouraging harmonization of fuel specifications across the continent. Without such steps, he argued, Africa's refining industry might struggle to survive the influx of cheaper, foreign-supplied fuels. Dangote also drew attention to the fact that while Africa produces around 7 million barrels of crude oil per day, a significant portion of its refined fuel is still imported. This dependency, according to him, puts local economies in a vulnerable position and prevents the continent from fully benefiting from its natural resources. In June 2025, Russian diesel and gas oil exports to Africa totaled approximately 0.7 million tons, a 30% drop from the previous month. Though Africa remains a relatively small player in Russia's export landscape compared to larger buyers like Turkey and Brazil, the volume of fuel entering African markets still represents a significant shift in the regional energy dynamics. The Dangote Refinery, commissioned in 2024, was built with the goal of reducing Africa's dependence on imported refined fuel. With a current processing capacity of 650,000 barrels per day, the facility is expected to increase output to 700,000 barrels per day in the coming year. In the first quarter of 2025 alone, Nigeria's refined fuel imports dropped to 88,000 barrels per day, down from over 500,000 barrels per day in 2023, largely due to output from the refinery. Despite this progress, Dangote noted that the continued importation of heavily discounted Russian fuel could undermine this development. Local refineries, he argued, may not be able to compete with the price advantage of foreign products being sold below cost due to geopolitical pressure. He stressed the importance of creating a level playing field that allows domestic refineries to thrive. Industry experts present at the Abuja conference echoed many of Dangote's concerns. Some pointed out that regulatory inconsistencies across African countries make it difficult to monitor the quality and origin of imported fuel. Others warned that without uniform fuel standards and robust enforcement, the continent could be exposed to environmental and health risks associated with low-quality petroleum products. Floating fuel markets, such as the one off the coast of Togo, were also discussed as part of the broader conversation. These floating storage units have become hubs for blending and distributing fuel, often without the same regulatory oversight found at onshore terminals. Dangote suggested that traders are using these offshore sites to store and mix various grades of fuel, some of which may not meet any formal standards, before distributing them into African markets. As fuel prices fluctuate globally, the appeal of discounted Russian fuel is understandable. But according to Dangote, African governments must look beyond short-term cost savings and consider the long-term implications. A continued reliance on cheap imported fuel could jeopardize local investment, stall industrial growth, and delay the development of Africa's own refining infrastructure. Some commentators following the story noted that the influx of Russian fuel is not unique to Africa. Similar trends have been observed in parts of Asia and Latin America. However, what makes Africa particularly vulnerable, they argue, is the continent's limited refining capacity and its fragmented regulatory framework. While Dangote's statements have sparked debate, there has not yet been a formal response from African trade or energy ministries. Some government officials have previously acknowledged the challenges facing local refineries, but cite issues such as financing, infrastructure, and political will as barriers to swift policy reform. The growing presence of Russian fuel in African markets also raises questions about geopolitical alignment. With Africa seeking to diversify its trade relationships and strengthen South-South cooperation, increased energy dealings with Russia may continue. However, experts stress the need for these relationships to be built on transparency, mutual benefit, and safety standards that protect local populations. In Nigeria, the government has expressed support for the Dangote Refinery and has highlighted it as a key step toward energy independence. Officials have indicated they are in discussions to formalize crude supply agreements with the refinery and reduce the country's reliance on imported fuel. Still, the broader challenge of managing imports and enforcing quality controls remains a work in progress. Market analysts following the region say that the situation represents both a threat and an opportunity. On one hand, unchecked imports can undermine local industry. On the other, the issue highlights the urgent need for Africa to accelerate its investment in refining, infrastructure, and energy policy reform. They suggest that if Africa can respond decisively, the continent could shift from being a passive consumer to an active participant in the global energy economy. In terms of economic impact, Dangote's remarks have already caused ripples. Some traders and downstream operators are reportedly reassessing their sourcing strategies. At the same time, industry observers say the viability of future refining projects across Africa may depend on how quickly governments can respond to these challenges. While the June dip in Russian diesel exports to Africa may suggest a short-term adjustment, the broader trend points to a sustained presence of discounted Russian fuel in global markets for the foreseeable future. For African refineries trying to establish themselves, this may mean ongoing pressure on margins and operational plans. Observers also note that consumer awareness will play a key role in how this situation unfolds. Many end users are not aware of the origin or quality of the fuel they consume. Advocacy groups and think tanks have started calling for greater transparency in fuel sourcing and labeling to ensure that citizens understand what they're putting into their vehicles and generators. As for Dangote himself, he remains focused on expanding the output of his Lagos facility and advocating for policies that support the broader goal of African industrial self-sufficiency. While he acknowledged the global economic pressures that influence fuel pricing, his central argument remains that African nations must prioritize their own refining capacity and protect it from being drowned out by global supply chain disruptions. His message has sparked a wider conversation among policymakers, trade unions, environmental groups, and private sector actors. The coming months may bring more detailed proposals from regional organizations, such as ECOWAS and the African Union, on fuel quality standards and regional energy trade. In the meantime, the Dangote Refinery continues its operations, supplying refined products to Nigerian and regional markets. As fuel prices remain a central concern for consumers and governments alike, the balance between affordability, safety, and local capacity remains a delicate one. We'll continue to follow this developing story and bring you updates as new policies, trade shifts, or refinery developments emerge across the continent. If you found this report informative, be sure to like this video so YouTube can recommend it to more viewers across Africa and beyond. It helps spread the message and supports more investigative reporting on the issues that matter most to the continent. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates from Voice of Africa.